Hey guys, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to part 1 of my brand new pop rock mixing series in Logic Pro 10. In this series, we're going to mix a Mayday children's song of mine called Magic, which I released about a month ago. And like my previous mixing series I did in Logic a couple of years ago, we're only going to be using stock Logic plugins. We're not going to be using any third-party plugins whatsoever. Also, if you'd like to get a copy of the raw Logic session so you can mix the song yourself and work along with me, I've provided a link in the video description below where you can purchase the session. I've also included a link to my SoundCloud account where you can stream the song for free, the fully mixed version of the song for free, just as a mix reference. Or if you really like, you can go download it on iTunes as well. So in this series, we're going to go through and fully mix and master the song, learning various mixing techniques along the way, but we're also going to cover some cool production techniques like building transitions and creating vocal harmonies for the singer. So in this initial video, we're just going to set levels on the mix, talk about pan law and adding panning to some of our tracks, as well as discuss the basics of dB-FS volume metering for mixing. So let's get into this. All right, so here's our session. Everything up here in blue is all vocals. The pink is keyboards and synths. The guitar is all in this yellow color. The bass is in green here. All this red is all of our live drums. And at the very bottom, there's a track with just some snaps on it, some group snaps on it. So to pull up our mixer, there's two ways you can do it. You can hit Command 2, which opens up its own, its own mixer window. This is particularly helpful if you have multiple displays. You can hit Command W to close it back out, or you can just hit X on your keyboard, and it'll pull up the mixer down in the bottom here. So let's just give this a play, and let's see what it sounds like. All right, sounds pretty terrible because basically all of the channels, all of their volume faders, that's these little guys right here, these are all set to unity gain, which means we're not adding or subtracting any gain. So basically all of the channels are full volume. What we need to do is start by pulling everything down to an acceptable level so that we're not clipping our master output or stereo output over here. So before we get into what all this is and what clipping is, and let's just talk about the decibel. The decibel is essentially a meaningless unit unless you have something to compare it to. So with levels and DAWs, we use a scale of decibels called dB-FS, which stands for full scale. So just to give you another point of reference with dBs, there's also dB-SPL, which is sound pressure level. So that's probably what most people are mostly familiar with is SPL dB, where you're referencing air pressure in the air. So you could, if you say, a quieter concert was 90 dB on average, you're saying that you're basically referencing an SPL scale, which references 0 dB as a very specific amount of air pressure and air pressure movement. And DAWs like Logic and Pro Tools and pretty much any digital audio workstation, you're working with FS. So it's full scale because you're referencing 0 dB again, but instead of typically moving up in values, you move down. So your dB-FS scales are typically going to be 0 and lower unless you're clipping. So when you go above at 0 dB or higher in full scale, you're actually clipping. And in the last playthrough there, you could see that the stereo output here was clipping by 6.4 dB. That's why it's showing in red, whereas all the other tracks are at 0 or lower. See how these are all in negative values. So what that basically tells us is it's referencing the peak volume level of the instrument or voice on that channel. So we typically we pretty much always want to stay at 0 or lower, otherwise we're going to clip. So what is clipping in a digital sense? In the digital world, you're working with ones and zeros. So your binary words in your audio files and your audio signal are made up of ones and zeros as well. So when you have all of your zeros turned into ones, you have a number that's so high that you can't really go anywhere, and therefore you're clipping. So anything at 0 dB or higher is technically filling out the audio signal fully, or all of your zeros are turning into ones. We don't want that because that can turn into distortion and nastiness later on. And if we mix at too loud of a volume, you can end up with a mix that's kind of muddy and doesn't have any definition or clarity later on. So one of the things I preach a lot is mixing at a very, very low level. So what I'm going to do to start is just hit Command A to select all of our channels in our mixer and pull everything way down here. I'm going to go down to about negative 15 or 16. So first of all, the left signal here, or the left value here, it doesn't have a negative on it, but it is negative. It's just there isn't enough characters in the box to show it. That is our fader level. And then, so this is your fader, and then this is your meter, and this is your meter level. So the other thing I wanted to explain is the stereo out and master output over here. These two channels essentially control the output volume coming out of Logic, and we always want to keep them at unity. Now, if you have one pulled down and you want to set it back to 0, you option click on it and you pull it up, and it pulls it all the way up to unity for you. So the stereo output is sort of like a master fader, what's called a master fader in most DAWs. It's essentially the sum of the volume of all of the other channels all into one channel. The master output is after the stereo output, and it essentially controls the output level out of Logic. We're basically going to set it to 0 and never worry about it again. So that's that. So let's listen to this now, and let's see what our metering level is on our stereo output. Yeah, so it's looking like it was dancing around between like 10 and roughly 7.9 or 8, negative 8 dB. So we've got a lot of headroom. So one of the things we'll talk about later on down the road is typically when I mix songs, I make sure that the stereo output has roughly between -3 and -6 dB of headroom before we go to mastering. Right now, we're going to go even lower than that because we're going to be pulling up some levels. We're going to be adding compression and EQ, and later on down the road, we may find ourselves taking the whole mix and bumping it down a touch just to keep the master or the stereo output from clipping. One other thing to notice is that sometimes you'll see channels with like a wider meter and a thinner meter. The ones that are a thinner meter, that's a mono channel with just 1 meter. The ones with the wider meter are the ones with 2 channels. That's for stereo metering. Another way you can tell whether a track is mono or stereo is up at the top here. You'll see just a single circle for mono and dual linked circles for stereo. So that's that. Now, let's just get like a decent just level mix on this. I'm just going to go through and everything's already at like a really low level. Let's start pulling some things up and even pulling some things down. There's some standard things I do pretty much no matter what I'm mixing. And like one of them, like for instance, for drums, I usually will have a lot more of the kick in mic, less of the kick out mic, more of the snare top mic, less of the snare side or snare bottom mic. The toms will go up. The overheads will go up a touch. The rooms will go up a touch. There's a mono room. We'll pull that down. And hi-hat's almost non-existent in the mix because it ends up getting picked up in the overhead mics anyway. And just to explain what we did when we mic'd up this drum kit, there's a Audix D6 on the inside of the kick drum for the kick in. The kick out was some Neumann BCM large diaphragm dynamic mic on the outside of the drum, like a couple feet from the front drum head, or not. When I say the front drum head, I mean like the battered drum head. So it's really like a foot away from the outside of the kick drum. Snare top, I believe, was either an SM7B or just a SM57 on the top of the snare drum, sort of angled. The snare side was most definitely an SM57, just facing the side of the drum. The tom mics, I believe, were some Sennheiser clip-on mics. The overheads, I believe, they're either AKG C414s or AKG C451s, which are both condenser mics. The stereo room track is a pair of Royer R121 ribbon mics, several, like 10 or like probably like 12 or 14 feet away from the drum kit. And then the room mono track is a Mojave MA200 tube condenser mic that was sort of tucked in a corner somewhere. And we'll talk about how to treat that later and how to use it later. And the hi-hat mic was probably a C451 as well. So that's that. The bass, let's pull that up a touch. In this song, the clean guitar is sort of a main idea, and so is the overdrive guitar, sort of like a rhythmic idea going on. The guitar solo will pull up as well. The synth pad can go down a bit. The synth lead is a main idea. The keys can come up just a touch. All of the vocals can come up, except for these backing low vocals. These are sort of like, they're actually me singing. They're like low male vocals tucked underneath the female vocals. So let's just hit play and see what this sounds like, and I'll start to make a few other level adjustments. All right, so that's a little bit more tolerable than what we had before, if everything was just sort of blaring at full blast. But there's some other issues too. Mixing is obviously a lot more than just level adjustments. We've got to add effects and things to it, reverb, blah, 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 all that stuff that'll come a lot later. But one of the very first things you should do, other than just doing level adjustments like I'm doing right now, is adjusting pan on some of these tracks, but essentially telling a channel where to go in the stereo field. Now, if you look at the vocals here, let me just zoom in a bit, you'll see that our bridge and our chorus are actually two different. Well, it looks like there's 4 down here, but it's really 2 and then 2 and then 2 and 2. As we'll hear, the vocals actually sort of overlap each other a bit, so they're sort of trading back and forth. But there's essentially 2 voices, 2 lead vocals singing at the same time in the bridge and the chorus, and there's some backing vocals down here as well. So other than the lead vocal in the verses, all of the vocals are doubled up in pairs. So what we're gonna do is these first 2 bridge vocals here, let's just solo these out. That's what the S is, it just solos out those tracks. You can also sort of, with both of them selected, you can click to solo both of them, or if they're not selected, you can click and swipe down to solo, or click to swipe down to unsolo. The M is muting, so you can do that as well. But let's just solo out just these first, actually let's solo all these bridge vocals here. Let's just play those by themselves. I wanna say to you. So it's 2 different recordings of the same, melody. So one thing that we can do to sort of give this some width and make them not sort of collide with each other is pan them left and right. So these are your balancers, or your pan knobs, and you can pull this all the way to the left. You can pull this all the way to the right. Now, what's always confusing about pan in Logic compared to other DAWs is that the far left value is shown as -64, and the far right value in Logic is shown as +63. And most other DAWs, it's just shown as negative and positive 100. Logic does this because it's a leftover sort of like throwback back to the MIDI days of Logic, where all of Logic's values are represented in MIDI values. So they're still sort of holding on to MIDI values. If you add those 2 numbers up, what you end up with is 127 plus center, which is 128 possible MIDI values, 0 to 127. So that's the reason why they do this. Just one little tiny note, not that it's super important, but -60 or -63 and +63 are the same amount of spread, left or right, but -64, it doesn't mean it's like one more left, it's the same as -63, just so you know that. So that's fully left and fully right, and we're going to do that with each pair of vocals here. So let's see what this sounds like now. I'm going to kick in the verse here. So we'll hear the verse right in the center by itself, and then we'll hear each pair of vocals sort of with this sort of wider stereo image, because one's fully left, one's fully right.
I wanted to hear you stole the magic from my heart. I want to say to you, just want to see this through. I want to say it to you, baby. Don't ever tear us down. I want to say to you.
So we've got sort of like a stereo sound now, like a wider sound. So we're going to do the same thing for all the chorus vocals. Each pair is going to go left and then right. And then we had some low male backing vocals as well. So let's listen to all of those, just the chorus vocals.
We're just so magical. This tragedy keeps running through my heart. We're just like animals, nonsensical. You keep running through my heart.
And we're going to be adding even more vocals to this. We're actually going to eventually go in here and we're going to harmonize some of her vocals with flex pitch to create some sort of artificial backing harmonies. But that'll come a lot further down the road in a later video. So, all right. So one thing I do want to talk about when it comes to pan is I want to talk about pan law. Let's just go up to File, Project Settings, and then go to Audio. File, Project Settings, Audio. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull up this page here. You can choose your sample rate. This whole session is recorded at 48K as opposed to 44.1. It's a little bit higher than the CD quality. You can mess with surround formats, but the thing I want to take a look at here is the pan law option. Now for pan law, you have three options: 0 dB, -3 dB, and -3 dB compensated. So here's what pan law is. If we're on either of the -3 dB options, it tells Logic to attenuate the signal when the pan knob or the balancer is set to center. So if you're on -3 dB, when you have the pan knob set center, it actually pulls the signal of the track down by -3 dB. Think of it this way: even if your track that you're panning is in mono, essentially it's going to a stereo master output. So when you move a pan knob left or right, you're not actually moving the signal in the stereo field. You're actually, like, for instance, if I pull a pan knob all the way over to the left, all you're doing is pulling up the volume of the left channel up and pulling the right channel down. Stereo imaging in DAWs is essentially it's an illusion. It's an audible illusion. It really has more to do with volume across the two speakers, across the two channels, than it does with actual stereo space. But it's an illusion of a spatial image. So when you have both channels, both the left and right channel center, you have two channels that are perfectly in phase. And also a pretty high volume. And so what happens is you get a little bit of a volume boost because the two channels are perfectly in phase and they're at full volume. So when you choose 3 dB or 3 dB compensated, it actually pulls down the volume a little bit when your balancer is center and your pan knob is center. The difference between the two is that -3 dB, the -3 dB option, just pulls it down. And you'll see that on the meter. -3 dB compensated pulls the signal down when it's center, but compensates it and pushes it back up by 3 dB. So you don't actually see any or hear any noticeable volume reduction on the channel. If you have 0, basically whenever you have a pan knob center, you're going to end up having a volume boost when it's center. So when you pan your knob left and right, you're going to hear it's going to result in a volume loss when you pan left or right. So I typically just keep this on -3 dB. And as I've said before, no one ever ruined a mix by not, putting one of these three options on. I just want to explain what it is and what it means. You can also choose to apply pan law to your stereo channels, but because my stereo channels, like my overheads, my room mics, some of my synthesizers, there's some variation in the left and the right channel. We don't really have to worry about the left and right channel being perfectly in phase because there's some variation in the left and the right channel. So I'm going to keep that off. So that's just pan law, just as quickly as possible. One thing I want to do is I want to just listen to the drums here. And because in the next video we're going to be working exclusively with the drums, I want to be able to solo them or mute them or adjust their levels all at the same time. Now you can do that just by dragging over all of them and hitting solo, but what if you don't want to do that every single time? Well, what you can do is you can actually create a group out of these tracks. You just drag over all of them. You click on this little blank tab here, or whatever you want to call it. This is the group assignment. You click on that, click and hold, and you can choose a new group here. So choose group 1, and it gives it a group assignment number. So now, even when all the drums aren't selected, if I hit solo, oops, it's not doing all of them, but watch this. There you go. When I pull them all up or pull them all down, it adjusts all of them together. So if I want to pull all the drums up, pull all the drums down, I can. Now, to make them all solo or make them all mute, they are all muting, but they're not all soloing. There's another option we have to turn on. So let's right click on our group assignment here, and let's go to Open Group Settings. The group we just created was number 1, so let's double click right here and give it a name. We'll call it drums. And you'll notice that when you create a group name, it shows up here. Let's go down to settings. And the settings for this group are mute, volume, automation mode, we're going to turn that off. Editing, we're going to keep that off for now. Solo, we want solo to be one of those options. And actually, I'm going to turn volume off too, because we're actually really just going to use the group to just solo all of the tracks and unsolo all the tracks. So now I can just click on any of the tracks in the drum group and it'll solo all of them. Let's go somewhere where there's like a fill, like a drum fill, like with the toms. I know there's like one really good one at the end here. So one thing or a couple things in the drums that we can pan are the 2 toms. This drum kit was recorded at what I call drummer perspective. I have one method called drummer perspective where when you listen to the mix, you hear the drum kit as if you're sitting behind the kit. So as long as it's a standard right-handed drummer, the hi-hat's going to be on the left, tom 1's going to be more over to the left, the floor tom's usually going to be over to the right, your left crash cymbal is going to be heard in the left channel, right crash cymbal on the right, usually the ride cymbal is going to be on the right. If you do audience perspective, it's like if you're standing right in front of the drum kit. So the hi-hat's going to appear on the right, not on the left, and vice versa with all the others. So we mic this in a way so that it is in drummer perspective, not audience perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pan the toms over. Tom 1's going to go to the left, 2's going to go to the right. The hi-hat's going to go quite a bit to the left. And everything else can stay center. Kick and snare, they're the fundamental sort of instruments of our beat. So we want to keep those center. The overheads and the room mics are essentially already panned. And it's hard to understand, but because they're 2 channels, the left is all left and the right is all right. So we don't have to really mess with those at all. Let's kick in the little snap track here too. Let's go somewhere over here. There we go. Cool. So that sounded pretty good so far. In the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the drums and we're going to correct some phase issues in the recording. And then we'll move on to EQing and compression for drums, and we'll sort of like work our way right to left here. The way I like to mix is I like to mix from the ground, what I call the ground up or the bottom up. So I start with the drums, then I move up to like bass, then guitars, then synthesizers, and finally vocals. So I like to sort of work from the ground up. So yeah, thanks for watching this video. I'm not really sure how many parts this video is going to be in. This is, I know, is going to be one of the longer videos of the mini series, if you will, just because of all the introductory material. But I plan on releasing these in much smaller chunks than I did the previous mixing series. So if at all possible, I'm going to try to keep each video under 15 minutes if I can. And that's fine with me if I end up having more videos but each video being shorter. I'm totally fine with that. So one thing to remember is if you want to download this mix and work along with me, feel free to go down to the video description where I've included a link where you can go and purchase the session. And I also have a free stream of the fully mixed version of the song on my SoundCloud account, which I've also put down in the video description below. So as always, thanks for watching. Hey guys, if you'd like to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel to see multiple new videos added every week. Also, you can check out carneymediagroup.com where you can view all of my video tutorials, search for specific topics, download the videos ad-free, and in some cases you can purchase session content so you can work along with me in the video. Also, please consider giving a monthly contribution at patreon.com/MusicTechHelpGuy. As always, thanks for your support and thanks for watching.